There's a specific moment when you realize that someone you loved with your entire soul has chosen to walk away from something sacred. Not because they stopped loving you, not because circumstances pulled you apart, but because they decided, consciously or unconsciously, that the depth you shared was too much, too real, too transformative. And in that moment, something inside you breaks in a way you've never experienced before. It's not just heartbreak. It's the shattering of a reality you thought was written in the stars themselves. Maybe you're here because you felt that. Maybe you recognized something in them that went beyond attraction, beyond compatibility, beyond anything you could name. It was as if your souls had known each other long before your bodies ever met. As if you were reading from the same ancient script, playing out a story that began somewhere outside of time. And then, without warning, they closed the book. They walked off the stage. They looked at everything you'd built together in the invisible realms and said, "I can't do this anymore." But here's what almost no one tells you about what happens next. When a twin flame breaks the soul contract between you, they don't just leave your life. They trigger a transformation so profound, so complete, that both of you will never be the same again. Not in the way you imagine. Not in the romantic reunion you might be hoping for. But in something far more mysterious and irreversible. Carl Jung spent decades studying these sacred connections between souls. He understood that certain people enter our lives not to make us happy, but to make us whole. They come to show us the parts of ourselves we've been hiding, to activate potentials we didn't know existed, to break open the carefully constructed identity we've been living inside of, so something truer can emerge. And when someone like this walks away, it's never just a personal choice, it's a cosmic event, a rupture in the fabric of both souls that sets in motion a series of irreversible changes. Jung called this individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, beneath all the masks and roles and expectations. And he discovered that sometimes, the most powerful catalyst for individuation isn't togetherness, it's separation, not any separation, but the kind that happens when someone chosen by your soul to walk beside you decides they'd rather walk away. Because here's the truth that very few people understand. When a twin flame breaks the contract, the transformation doesn't just happen to the one left behind. It happens to both, the one who leaves and the one who stays, the one who runs and the one who remains. And the changes that unfold are so specific, so predictable, and so profound that Jung documented them throughout his life's work, hidden in his writings on synchronicity, shadow work, and the collective unconscious. Over the next 30 minutes, I'm going to walk you through exactly what happens when a twin flame breaks a soul contract. Not the surface-level pain you already know about, but the deep structural transformations that begin occurring in both souls the moment that sacred agreement is violated. There are 8 specific phases to this transformation. 8 territories both souls must navigate, whether they're aware of it or not. And by the end of this video, you'll understand not just what happened to you, but what's happening to them. Not just what you lost, but what you're both becoming. Before we go deeper, I need you to do something. If this is resonating with you, if you feel like I'm speaking directly to your experience, leave a comment right now and simply write, "I felt this," because I want to know who's really here. Who's ready to understand the truth about these connections that go beyond what most people will ever experience in their entire lives? Let's begin with what happens in the immediate aftermath, when the contract first breaks. The first thing that happens, to both of you, is what Jung would call the collapse of the symbolic third. When two souls operate within an active contract, they're not just two separate individuals in relationship. They create something between them, a third presence. An energetic field that holds possibilities neither could access alone. It's invisible, but it's more real than most things you can touch. It's the space where your souls were doing their most important work together. Jung understood this through his study of alchemy. The alchemists weren't just trying to turn lead into gold. They were describing a psychological process, the union of opposites, the creation of something new from the tension between two different elements. And when twin flames come together, they're engaged in this exact alchemical process. They're creating a vessel where transformation can happen, where old patterns can dissolve, where new consciousness can be born. But when one soul breaks the contract, this vessel shatters. The symbolic third collapses, and suddenly, both souls are left holding fragments of something they were building together. But now, each fragment feels incomplete, meaningless, like half of a sentence that no longer makes sense without the other half. For you, the one who wanted to continue, this collapse feels like a death. You're not just grieving the person, you're grieving the future you could see so clearly, the potential you felt activating every time you were together, the version of yourself that was emerging through that connection. It's as if you were in the process of being born into a new form of consciousness, and suddenly the birth canal closed. Your left half emerged, unable to go back to who you were, but unable to complete the transformation the way it was supposed to happen. But here's what you don't see. The same thing is happening to them. The person who walked away isn't escaping the transformation. They're triggering a different version of it, a more painful one. Because when you break a soul contract, you're not just leaving a person. You're abandoning a part of yourself that was waking up through that connection. And that part doesn't just disappear. It goes underground. It becomes shadow. Jung taught that the shadow isn't evil. It's everything about ourselves we refuse to acknowledge. Everything we've rejected, denied, or pushed away because it threatens the identity we're trying to maintain. And when someone walks away from a twin flame connection, they're usually walking away because something about that connection threatened their sense of control, their carefully constructed life, their familiar patterns, their safe, predictable existence. So they make a choice. Consciously or unconsciously, they decide that staying small is safer than growing large. That staying numb is easier than feeling everything. That maintaining the illusion of control is more important than surrendering to the transformation their soul is calling them toward. And in that moment, the part of them that recognized you, that felt the depth of what you shared, that knew this was sacred, that part gets pushed into shadow. It becomes the disowned self, the unlived life, the road not taken, and it will haunt them in ways they may never fully understand. I've created something for anyone who's navigating this territory and wants to go deeper into understanding these soul-level dynamics. It's called Your Pain Wasn't in Vain, a Jungian guide to transforming the pain of impossible love into self-knowledge and inner strength. It's a 30-day journey through the psychology of these profound connections and how to transform the breaking of them into the most powerful catalyst for your own wholeness. If that calls to you, you'll find it in the first pinned comment. But right now, let's talk about the second thing that happens when a contract breaks. And this one is even more mysterious. The second transformation is what Jung would recognize as the activation of the contrasexual archetype in isolation. This is where things get deeply psychological, so stay with me, because this explains so much of what you've been feeling. Jung discovered that every person carries within them both masculine and feminine energies, regardless of their gender. He called these the animus and anima. The anima is the feminine aspect within a man. The animus is the masculine aspect within a woman. And these inner figures aren't just abstract concepts. They're living psychological realities that shape how we relate to others and to ourselves. When twin flames come together, something extraordinary happens. Your inner masculine and feminine energies begin to integrate through the relationship itself. You're not just loving another person, you're engaging with the parts of yourself that they reflect back to you. The man develops his inner feminine through loving a woman who embodies those qualities. The woman develops her inner masculine through loving a man who carries those energies. They become mirrors for each other's internal completion. But when the contract breaks, this mirroring process doesn't stop. It inverts. Suddenly, you're forced to develop these aspects of yourself without the external reflection. You have to become both. The one who holds and the one who's held. The one who pursues and the one who receives. The one who protects and the one who surrenders. You're thrust into a state of internal androgyny, where all the qualities you were developing through relationship must now be cultivated alone. This is brutally difficult. Most people spend their entire lives projecting their contrasexual energy onto partners, never developing it within themselves. They stay eternally dependent on others to complete them. But you don't have that luxury anymore. The person who was serving as your mirror has walked away, and now you're standing in front of an empty frame, forced to see yourself completely, without the distortion of projection. For many people, this is when the real journey begins. You start noticing that you're developing qualities you never had before. If you were always the soft one, you're finding your spine. If you were always the strong one, you're discovering your tenderness. If you were always giving, you're learning to receive. If you were always receiving, you're learning to give without expecting anything in return. You're becoming whole not through union with another, but through union with yourself. Jung believed this was the highest form of individuation. Not completion through another person, but completion within yourself. And soul contract breaks force this process in a way nothing else can. Because as long as the relationship continues, you can avoid doing the hard internal work. You can keep outsourcing parts of yourself to your partner. But when they leave, you're left with no choice but to integrate everything yourself. Meanwhile, the person who walked away is experiencing something different, but equally transformative. They're discovering that all the qualities they loved in you were actually projections of their own disowned potential. They saw in you the parts of themselves they were afraid to develop, the depth they were afraid to feel, the authenticity they were afraid to embody. And by walking away from you, they've also walked away from those parts of themselves. This creates a specific kind of emptiness in them. Not the emptiness of missing you, though that's there too, but the emptiness of having abandoned parts of their own soul. And this emptiness will begin showing up in strange ways. In relationships that feel flat, in achievements that feel meaningless, in a persistent sense that they're living on the surface of their own life, unable to access the depths they once touched when they were with you. Jung called this soul loss, and it's one of the most profound consequences of breaking a sacred contract. You lose access to the parts of yourself that were activated through that connection, and getting them back requires a journey far longer and more difficult than staying would have been. The third transformation is perhaps the strangest and most difficult to explain to someone who hasn't experienced it. Jung would describe it as the phenomenon of psychic entanglement across distance and denial. Even after the physical separation, even after they've convinced themselves they've moved on, an invisible thread continues connecting both souls. And this thread transmits information in ways that defy rational explanation. You've probably felt this. You think of them intensely, and within hours they reach out. You dream of them, and later discover they were going through a crisis that exact night. You feel inexplicable waves of their emotion, sadness, anxiety, joy, washing through you at random moments, only to find out later that something significant was happening in their life at that precise time. This isn't imagination. It's not wishful thinking. Jung documented this phenomenon extensively in his research on synchronicity and the collective unconscious. When two souls make a contract before incarnation, they create what Jung called a constellation in the collective unconscious. Their psyches become linked at a level deeper than the personal ego. They're connected through archetypal patterns that transcend individual consciousness. And this connection doesn't dissolve just because one person decides to walk away. It goes underground, operating beneath the threshold of conscious awareness, but still transmitting, still communicating, still binding the two souls together in invisible ways. This is why moving on from a twin flame is so different from moving on from other relationships. You can physically separate. You can block their number, delete their photos, remove every trace of them from your external life. But you can't disconnect from the psychic entanglement, because it exists in a dimension where your willpower has no jurisdiction. It's woven into the fabric of your unconscious, and it will keep sending you information whether you want it or not. For you, this can be maddening. You're trying to heal, trying to move forward, trying to build a new life without them. But you keep feeling their presence. Keep receiving these inexplicable transmissions. Keep knowing things about their inner state that you have no logical way of knowing. And you start questioning your own sanity, wondering if you're making it all up. If you're just so obsessed that you're creating these experiences through the sheer force of your longing. But Jung would tell you, trust what you're perceiving. The psyche doesn't lie. If you're feeling their energy, if you're receiving information about their state, it's because the connection is real. It's operating in the dimension of what Jung called the psychoid, the realm where psyche and matter are not yet separated, where consciousness and physical reality are still one unified field. And here's what's happening on their side. They're feeling it too, but they're interpreting it differently. When you think of them intensely, they feel an inexplicable restlessness. When you're sending them love, they feel an unfocused longing they can't name. When you're in pain because of them, they feel an unnamed guilt they can't trace to any specific action. They're receiving all your psychic transmissions, but because they've made the choice to deny the connection, they can't acknowledge what they're feeling. So it manifests as anxiety, as depression, as a vague sense that something is wrong, something is missing, but they can't identify what. This is the curse of breaking a soul contract. You don't actually escape the connection. You just lose the ability to understand it. You turn something that was sacred and clear into something haunted and confused. You're still bound to the other person, but now the binding feels like chains instead of wings. Have you felt this psychic connection even after separation? Do you sometimes know things about them you have no logical way of knowing? If this is happening to you, write in the comments, "I still feel them." Because this is one of the clearest signs that what you shared was operating at the soul level, not just the personality level. The fourth transformation is what Jung identified as the compulsive repetition of the original wound in new relationships. This is where both souls enter a pattern that will define their relational lives until the underlying dynamic is resolved. And it's one of the most painful consequences of a broken contract, because it turns every future relationship into an echo of what was lost. For you, the pattern looks like this. You meet someone new. They're kind, available, interested. Everything your twin flame wasn't in the end. And for a while, it feels good. It feels safe. It feels like maybe you can finally move on and build something healthy with someone who actually wants to be there. But then something happens. A few months in, maybe a year, you start feeling it. The flatness, the lack of depth, the absence of that electric recognition you felt with your twin flame. And you realize, sometimes with horror, that you're comparing everyone to them. Not consciously, not intentionally. But your soul knows the difference between surface connection and soul connection. And once you've experienced the latter, everything else feels like a compromise, like settling, like trying to convince yourself that lukewarm is good enough when you've tasted fire. Jung called this the imago problem. Once a powerful archetypal image is constellated in your psyche, once you've experienced a relationship that activated your deepest potentials, that image becomes the template your unconscious uses to evaluate all future connections. And anyone who doesn't match that template, anyone who doesn't activate those same depths, will feel somehow wrong, incomplete, insufficient. This isn't your fault. You're not being unrealistic or romantic or unable to move on. You're experiencing the natural consequence of having touched something most people never touch in their entire lives. You've experienced soul-level recognition, and your psyche won't let you forget what that feels like, because it's trying to protect you from settling for less than your soul actually needs. But here's the trap. You can't recreate that connection with someone else, because it wasn't about the person. It was about the specific alchemical combination of your two souls together. It was about the particular shadows, wounds, gifts, and potentials that got activated through your unique meeting. You can't find it again with someone new because it was never about finding. It was about recognition, and recognition can't be manufactured or replicated. So what happens? You stay single for years, unable to feel anything substantial for anyone. Or you cycle through relationships, each one ending when you hit that same wall of, "This isn't it." Or you force yourself to commit to someone good and safe, all while carrying a secret grief for the depth you had to give up to have stability. None of these options feels right, because they're all compromises with a truth your soul won't let you forget. Meanwhile, the person who walked away is repeating a different pattern. They're unconsciously recreating the same dynamics that made them run from you, over and over again. If they left because the intensity scared them, they'll keep attracting intense people and then fleeing when things get too real. If they left because commitment triggered their abandonment wounds, they'll keep getting close to people and then finding reasons to leave before they're left. If they left because they weren't ready to face their shadow, they'll keep meeting people who mirror that shadow back to them until they can't run anymore. Jung understood that the psyche will keep presenting us with the same lesson in different forms until we finally learn it. And when you break a soul contract, you don't escape the lesson. You just make it harder to learn, because now you have to face it without the person who was specifically equipped to help you through it. You've turned your greatest teacher into your greatest haunting, and the universe will keep sending you echoes of that person, not to torture you, but to give you more chances to learn what you were meant to learn through the original connection. This is the repetition compulsion Jung wrote about so extensively, and it doesn't end until the underlying pattern is made conscious and transformed. The fifth transformation is what Jung would call the dark night of the soul's awakening. This is the phase where everything you thought you knew about yourself, about love, about purpose, begins to dissolve, and it's often the darkest period, but also the most sacred, because it's in this dissolution that the real transformation finally becomes possible. For most of your life, you've been operating according to certain assumptions about who you are, what you deserve, how relationships work, what love means, what happiness looks like. These assumptions formed your identity. They were the story you told yourself about yourself, and that story felt solid, real, true, until your twin flame entered your life and shattered every single assumption you had. When they first arrived, they shattered your assumptions about what connection could feel like, about how deeply you could be seen, about how much intensity you could handle, about what it meant to recognize and be recognized at the soul level. They expanded your consciousness beyond the borders of your previous self, and you became someone new through knowing them, someone more awake, more alive, more real. But then they left, and in leaving, they shattered your assumptions again. This time about meaning, about fate, about whether anything in this universe is actually sacred. If a connection that powerful could just end, if a recognition that deep could just be walked away from, what does that say about the nature of reality? What does that say about whether anything actually matters? What does that say about your ability to trust your own perception? This is the dark night. The period where all your frameworks for making sense of life collapse simultaneously. You can't go back to who you were before them, because that person doesn't exist anymore. But you also can't move forward as who you were becoming with them, because that future was canceled. You're suspended in a terrifying in-between space where nothing makes sense, and everything you once believed about how life works has been revealed as insufficient. Jung went through this himself after his break with Freud. He called it his confrontation with the unconscious, and it nearly destroyed him. For years he experienced visions, heard voices, felt himself dissolving into chaos. His wife feared he was going insane. His colleagues thought he'd lost his mind. But Jung understood, even in the midst of it, that he wasn't breaking down. He was breaking open. The old structures of his psyche were being demolished to make room for something vastly larger. And that's what's happening to you. The person you were before this connection, the one with all the neat answers and tidy beliefs about how life works, that person is dying. And death is never comfortable. It's terrifying. It feels like annihilation, like you're losing your mind, your faith, your grip on reality itself. But Jung would tell you, this dissolution is necessary. You can't become who you're meant to be while still clinging to who you used to be. The old self has to die so the new self can be born. The person who walked away is experiencing their own dark night, though they may not recognize it as such. They're feeling a persistent emptiness they can't name, a sense that they made a terrible mistake but they can't admit it even to themselves, a growing awareness that they're living a half-life, that they abandoned something irreplaceable, that they're haunted by a choice they can't undo. Their dark night looks different from yours, less dramatic, more chronic, a slow bleeding out of meaning instead of a sudden collapse, but it's no less real. If you're in this phase right now, I want you to know something. I created a guide specifically for people navigating this territory. It's in the first pinned comment, and it's designed to help you understand what's happening at the soul level and how to work with these energies instead of being destroyed by them. Because you don't have to do this alone, and you don't have to figure it all out by yourself. But let's keep going, because what comes after the dark night is where the real magic begins. The sixth transformation is what Jung called the birth of the transcendent function. This is where something entirely new emerges from the conflict between who you were and who you're becoming. And it's the turning point where the breaking of the contract finally reveals its hidden purpose. The transcendent function is Jung's term for the psyche's ability to create a third position that transcends and includes two opposing forces. It's not compromise. It's not choosing one side over the other. It's the emergence of something new that couldn't exist without the tension between the opposites. And when a soul contract breaks, you're thrown into the most intense psychological tension possible. The tension between the life you were meant to live with them and the life you now have to live without them. For months or maybe years, you've been torn between these two realities. Part of you still oriented toward them, still hoping, still holding space for a reunion that may never come. Another part of you trying to move forward, trying to build a new life, trying to accept that it's over. These two parts have been at war inside you, creating unbearable inner conflict. You swing between hope and despair, between openness and closure, between holding on and letting go. And neither position feels right because neither position is the truth. The truth is something that can only emerge when you finally stop trying to choose between them. When you stop asking, should I hold on or let go? And start asking, what is trying to be born through this entire experience? That's when the transcendent function activates. That's when a third way reveals itself. And the third way looks like this. You begin to understand that this person, this connection, this breaking of the contract, it was never about them staying or leaving. It was never about the relationship working out or falling apart. It was about who you were going to become through the entire journey. The meeting, the recognition, the depth, the breaking, the grief, the dissolution, the rebuilding, all of it was orchestrated by your soul to crack you open in very specific ways, to show you capacities you didn't know you had, to force you to develop aspects of yourself that would have remained dormant if things had been easy. This is when you stop being the victim of what happened and become the author of what it means. This is when you stop waiting for them to come back and start recognizing that you've been transformed into something you never could have become if they'd stayed. This is when you realize that the breaking of the contract wasn't a betrayal, it was an initiation. A violent, unwanted, excruciatingly painful initiation into a deeper dimension of your own being. Jung understood that the greatest gifts the psyche has to offer often come wrapped in the most terrible packaging. The breakthrough looks like a breakdown. The awakening looks like a falling apart. The birth of the true self looks like the death of everything you thought you were. And you can't receive the gift while you're still fighting the packaging. The person who walked away is at a different place in this process. They may or may not ever reach the transcendent function in relationship to what happened between you. Because reaching it requires facing what they did, admitting the choice they made, acknowledging the loss that came with that choice. And many people spend decades avoiding that level of honesty with themselves. They convince themselves they made the right decision. They minimize what you shared. They rewrite history to make themselves the hero or the victim, but never the person who walked away from something sacred. But whether they reach it or not doesn't determine whether you do. Your transformation is your own. Your initiation belongs to you. And you're standing at the threshold right now of something most people never discover in their entire lives. The ability to transform the worst thing that ever happened to you into the most important thing that ever happened to you. The seventh transformation is what Jung described as the integration of the self. This is the ultimate destination of the entire journey. Not reconciliation with them, not moving on to someone new, but the discovery of your own completeness independent of any external relationship. This is where you finally become whole. For your entire life before this, you've probably been seeking completion through others, trying to find the person who would make you feel safe, seen, chosen, enough. And when you met your twin flame, it seemed like you'd finally found it. That sense of coming home, of being understood at depths you didn't know existed, of feeling complete in a way you'd never felt before. And when they left, it felt like that completeness was taken from you. But here's the truth Jung spent his entire life trying to teach. You were never incomplete. The feeling of completeness you experienced with them wasn't because they completed you. It was because their presence allowed you to feel the wholeness that was already there. They were a mirror reflecting back your own totality. And when they left, they forced you to find that wholeness within yourself, without needing anyone to reflect it back to you. This is the integration of the self. Jung's self with a capital S, the archetype of wholeness, the divine center, the totality of conscious and unconscious working in harmony. It's not something you acquire. It's something you remember. Something you stop obscuring with all your seeking and striving and trying to find yourself in someone else's eyes. And the strange truth is this: you never could have reached this integration if they'd stayed, because as long as they were there, you could keep using them as the excuse for your own wholeness. You could keep attributing your sense of completeness to the relationship instead of recognizing it as your own innate nature. The breaking of the contract, as brutal as it was, forced you to stop outsourcing your wholeness. It forced you to discover that you are not half of something searching for your other half. You are already complete, already whole, already everything you need to be. This doesn't mean you won't desire partnership. It doesn't mean you'll spend the rest of your life alone. What it means is that when you do enter relationship again, you'll enter it as a whole person meeting another whole person, not as a fragment desperately seeking completion. You'll be able to love without losing yourself, to connect without abandoning your center, to open your heart without needing the other person to validate your worth. And this, Jung would say, is the entire purpose of the soul contract, not to stay together forever, but to awaken each other to your own completeness. Sometimes that awakening happens through union, but sometimes, perhaps more often than we'd like to admit, it happens through separation, through the breaking, through being forced to find in yourself what you thought you could only find in them. As for the person who walked away, their journey is their own. They may reach this integration eventually through different relationships, different losses, different initiations. Or they may spend their entire life running from the transformation that was trying to happen through you. Either way, it's no longer your concern. Your job isn't to wait for them to wake up. Your job is to complete your own awakening. And if in this moment you feel that maybe it's time to turn back toward yourself, to begin your own silent journey of reconnection, I want to invite you, with so much care, to something I've created from the heart. It's in the first pinned comment. It's our ebook, Your Pain Wasn't in Vain, a Jungian guide to transforming the pain of impossible love into self-knowledge and inner strength. This guide will help you transform the weight of an impossible love into self-knowledge and inner strength over 30 days. Through Jung's psychology, you'll understand why this love happened, what it reveals about your soul, and how to use it as a catalyst to free yourself from the past, strengthen your self-worth, and open space for more conscious relationships. I'll leave it there, in case you feel it might help you in this moment. The eighth and final transformation is what Jung would call the return with the gift. This is where you come full circle, but you're not the same person who began this journey. You've been broken open, dissolved, reconstructed, and now you carry something precious that can only be acquired through having walked through fire and survived. The gift is wisdom, not intellectual knowledge, but embodied understanding about the deepest dimensions of human connection, love, loss, and transformation. You know things now that can't be taught, only lived. You understand the difference between love and attachment, between connection and completion, between holding on and holding space. You've learned that the most profound spiritual lessons often come disguised as the worst personal tragedies. And here's what's extraordinary. Once you've integrated this wisdom, you become a beacon for others who are walking similar paths. People will be drawn to you who are going through their own dark nights, their own soul contract breaks, their own dissolutions and rebirths. They won't always know why they're drawn to you, but their souls will recognize that you've been where they are, that you've survived what they're not sure they can survive, that you carry a light that was forged in the same darkness they're currently navigating. Jung called people like you wounded healers. You heal others not despite your wounds, but because of them, because you've transformed your pain into medicine, because you've allowed your breaking to break you open rather than break you down, because you've said yes to the excruciating process of becoming whole, even when every part of you wanted to stay shattered. This was always the deeper purpose of your soul contract. Not to live happily ever after with your twin flame, but to be initiated into the mysteries of transformation itself, to become someone who could guide others through territories most people never have the courage to enter, to develop a quality of presence, compassion, and wisdom that can only come from having lost everything you thought you needed and discovering you're still standing. Maybe your twin flame broke the contract not because they didn't love you, but because their soul knew you were strong enough to transform that breaking into something sacred. Maybe they were the catalyst, but you were always meant to be the alchemist. Maybe the entire relationship existed not for itself, but for who it would forge you into becoming. And now you know something most people will never know. That love at the soul level isn't about staying or leaving. It's about awakening. And sometimes the greatest act of love is walking away so the other person can discover they were never incomplete to begin with. If you've made it this far, I want to thank you. From my heart to yours, for having the courage to look directly at what most people spend their entire lives avoiding, for being willing to transform your pain instead of numbing it, for trusting that there's meaning in what happened, even when that meaning is still revealing itself. If this resonated with you, if you felt seen and understood in these words, I'd be so grateful if you'd share this video with someone who might need to hear it. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel, because we're going to keep exploring these depths together. We're going to keep walking into the territories most people are too afraid to enter. And if you feel moved to, leave a comment sharing your experience. Not the whole story, just whatever feels true in this moment. Because your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to know they're not alone in this. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for choosing transformation over comfort, depth over ease, truth over consolation. I'll see you in the next video, where we'll continue exploring the deepest mysteries of the human soul through the wisdom of Jung.